Welcome to You Heard It From Us, the podcast where adventure meets advice. I'm DnDWife, your artistic storyteller and dedicated miniature painter.
And I'm Dungeon Master Eguile, your seasoned storyteller with a flair for epic tales and a passion for bringing our worlds to life. Together, we are a couple of nerds.
Whether you're navigating the depths of the dungeon or the dynamics of your gaming table, we're here to explore the vibrant world of tabletop role-playing games with you.
Each episode, we dive into topics that every gamer can relate to, like, is there really such thing as too many dice?
Or how to keep the peace when your co-adventurer is also your co-pilot in life.
We share our own trials, triumphs, and tales from the enchanting world of Extraeus and beyond, all while connecting with you, our amazing TTRPG community.
From community polls to social media shoutouts, we want you to be part of our adventure. So grab your favorite set of dice
and join us as we embark on a quest to make your tabletop gaming experience more fun and meaningful.
This is You Heard It From Us,
where every episode is an adventure. Welcome back, adventurers, to You Heard It From Us. I'm DM Eguile.
And I'm DnDWife. Today's episode is all about metagaming. How much is too much? Is it always bad, or can it sometimes help the game?
We'll break down the pros and cons, look at what our can community had to say, and share our own personal takes. Come join us at the table, and let's dive in. Mm-hmm. Now, I think this is one of those topics that is a tough one.
Yeah,
right?
Very much so.
And I think it's because a lot of
contention.
people have, and I think really where it's not necessarily the act of metagaming, but more of exactly what is metagaming.
Yeah, and right? The degree, I guess.
Because really, I think there's a lot of different interpretations as to what exactly can be contrived as metagaming, right? So, what
would you define it as?
So, for me, metagaming is always just is the basis around character knowledge, right? So it is this kind of superlative thing where it's like, okay, look, not everything is metagaming, but everything can be metagaming, right? So it's more of just okay, we acknowledge that we're big creatures operating these little tiny creatures in a world in our minds and stuff like that. So obviously we know things that others don't.
Right, externally, outside of our characters.
So there are ways of obviously that we take certain liberties, and I always laugh at VLDR that on YouTube, and they did the whole how come we don't poop in D&D?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's there's a reason why, because it's freaking stupid and it wastes a lot of damn time.
Yeah.
So for me, metagaming to me is when it's done to create an unfair advantage, right? So if you're metagaming going, okay, well, I know I have something on me, my character may have forgotten or something, but I know, obviously I have my inventory, but, and so there's a lot of ways that you can say, okay, well, I'm metagaming, yes, but at the same time, I'm not really hurting the table. But my definition of metagaming really comes down to when it's done to get an unfair edge.
Yeah, in the game specifically.
Right. So and I think, unfair, some people might misconstrue that as cheat.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying to
not
cheat,
necessarily,
but to get an unfair edge. So, things that, are just beyond the realm of kind of acceptance or even acknowledgement. Right. So, there are things where it's, one common one that we get from you, Miss DnDWife, is we have to constantly tell you you're not there.
Yeah, because I forget that where might be split and in different places.
Right, and so in essence, that's theoretically metagaming, right?
Yeah.
So that's the one where it's well, wait, it's not really necessarily being done to get an unfair edge. It's just, it's hard to not be there
or not want to say something.
You're sitting at the table, you're hearing this monologue, you want to be there, you just unfortunately you forgot that you're not in this particular scene, right? So that's one thing where I'm yeah, it's metagaming, but at the same time, you wanted to say what you wanted to say, right? And everyone laughs or everyone gets a little more, that kind of thing. Or, if it's something where you're like, oh, they ran into this person. Well, I wanted to be there. Don't forget to ask about this. Oh, wait, I'm not there. Sorry. And it kind of reminds them. But really, that can be a help. But then you get like crazy metagaming. And so this one, this is from a former player of mine, Jason, right? When he played a character named Milo.
Yeah.
And I think you know where I'm going with this one. Is all of a sudden, like, you guys are level 1. This is the Pandelver campaign. Started. And he starts buying up soap. Yeah. And he's buying up soap, like, and so
like
first,
massive quantities.
Like, at first it was like, oh, is this some kind of funny quirk? Like, he's gonna, like, make a slip and slide.
Kind of thing.
Or is he gonna use this to do, like, some kind of trick? Because at this point, he's a halfling. He's a halfling rogue, which means anything can happen.
Right, he could do anything.
But then the player was attempting to then melt down the soap to collect and extract the glycerin in order to make bombs.
Yeah.
Now, see, that's metagaming where your character, one, whether or not the fantasy soap has glycerin and just doesn't
is up for contention.
And just doesn't use like animal fat.
Yeah, we ended up deciding it probably wouldn't.
Well, I think we even looked up like old timey soap and like glycerin wasn't used for a long time, right?
I think it was like a line.
So those are times where it's like, okay, you're not necessarily trying to cheat, but you're going beyond the realm, right? And I think it's one of those things that never goes away, and I don't think anyone's ever going to really have like a very hard yes or no stance. And really the way I look at it too, and we've kind of adapted it, some of my players at least, is like if you look at things like Critical Role with the metagaming pigeon.
Yep.
Right? Like, so they even, and these are like people who are quote unquote professionals who play all the time, they can't even prevent it from happening, right?
So much so that it's become a moniker amongst them.
Right, and it's like a thing where like they quietly, like, well, not so quietly, interrupt each other with this metagaming pigeon to kind of warn each other when they're going too far.
Yeah.
Right? So there's kind of like all walks of life when it comes to metagaming, right? It's not just viewed what it is, but the first thing I think is always the definition, right? And really it's just anytime you use knowledge that your character doesn't have or has never obtained, right? And it's so funny too, because it usually is as simple as like just taking a few extra steps.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know what happened. Well, all you have to do is ask them and they're just going to tell you. So all you have to do is ask that first.
Right.
You're just skipping a step. But I mean, I think there are some, good side, and especially as you as a player, I feel like the good side is more important as a player than it is as the dungeon master.
Right. Absolutely. At least for my side, my perspective as a player, it can be just a little bit of metagaming, not to a great extent. It can help keep the game fun and immersive because we have to some extent, right? We have to just kind of accept that magic or certain things will happen in the world because they happen, because we created it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too comes into, this idea of sometimes metagaming can be used to help people kind of understand concepts or what people are trying to get across. So we have a player by the name of Richard. He knows what he knows what he does. But he's very much someone who will snap with like a more pop culture reference or a song or something. But because of that, everyone's kind of on the same page.
Yeah, we all understand.
So it might be it might have been confusing, or something may have not been necessarily the tone.
Or it might break the immersion of the game a little.
Right. Well, I wouldn't call that a good thing as a dungeon master.
Oh, true.
I'm saying in terms of there are times when that helps in terms of mechanically speaking for allowing other players to understand what's going on by using out-of-game words.
Yeah.
Whether it's like referencing concepts or things in the game for the outside world, which the player Tobias or the player Richard tends to do a little bit of as a way of helping not only his gameplay but also having other people understand what he's trying to do. Right? So like if you're doing like a Bono joke in game in your accent, obviously the players in the game don't know who Bono is.
Right.
We do, so we at least as players and the DM understand what they're trying to do without actually knowing where they're going, right? And so there are times now, I will say when it comes to the bad side was kind of what you were just talking about, not to interject and pull to the dark side of the DM's issues with metagaming.
Yeah.
But I will say that does kind of proceed to some of the problems of breaking immersion.
True.
You know, there's nothing wrong when you're having this heartfelt moment and you're trying to be, say something poignant, and because you happen to say, I'm making my way, and the whole table starts talking and starts singing, I don't know if that's Michelle Branch or something, right? Starts singing the song, right? And it's like, okay, I get it, but what did we lost that kind of emotional point, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the other points of that it really kind of can, ruin the game in certain ways if left unchecked, right?
Yeah.
So it is that thing where, I have an issue where it is this kind of just baseline knowledge. I am in no way against, everything. I'm an impromptu dungeon master, right? Like I allow you guys to do just about anything.
Yeah.
But for me, you have to at least make the steps. See, I come from a professional public speaking and debating world. So you have to do the logic chain.
Yeah.
And as long as the logic chain is there, I pretty much allow anything. But you don't get to just skip and have things happen.
Yeah, or say just because.
Just because, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you need to tell me why. Oh, well, this, I think one instance where we had one where it was a little too far out was, I think one of my players was talking about making like this like mass teleportation device.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you totally could eventually. But
With
right
time.
now, how are you going to show me, or how are you going to explain how you have that technology?
Because in the next 72 hours, you can't build
the books that, and then you start, to me, I think where my biggest perspective is making sure you pick kind of the lane you want to metagame in, right? So that's what I kind of look at, right? So it's like, if you want to play in the world of the books, like the rules, awesome, no problem, right? And then we stay in that kind of composite world, right? So we understand, okay, those are the rules. So anytime we reference the rules, it's not really metagaming. It's reminding us of the rules.
Yeah.
It's reminding us, hey, we're playing a game. That's why we roll clickety-clackies. So that way we know. But if it's more of, well, I want to stay in the narration, I want to live in the world of fantasy and RP and everything, cool, then we're not going to bog by rules. So I don't want to necessarily be hearing like, well, actually, you can't, well, no, we're going to do one or the other, because sometimes it is the back and forth, right? And so that's for me and for me, it's like, I want you guys to be the character, right? And so if you're just yourself, well, that's not fun, because, you kind of know how D&D works. You know how, I think the easiest way, and I point out metagaming against you guys, is when you start using like mechanical stuff in game.
Yeah.
Oh, kind barkeep, how much HP do you have left? And it's like, what?
What is that?
Yeah, and so it is that thing, right, where it's like, well, wait a minute, like, they're not going to know what that is. Well, I know it. Well, of course you know what it is. You're playing the game, right? But and I think this was a good example of this. I don't know, what are you pointing? You got me.
I thought of an example.
You first. I've already given enough.
Well, I remember when Tobias first started, because he's our healer, right? When he first started, that's a mistake he would make a lot, is he would say like, hey, how much HP do you have? But like, in character, that doesn't really work, because we don't have HP in the world of Extraeus necessarily. So you would tell him a bunch of times, it's like, well, what are you talking about? I just feel kind of bad. Yeah. And so we started adopting that in the game, where it's like, hey, how are you feeling? And then we would be like, oh, well, it hurts quite a bit.
Yeah, he started asking me more of like, what's the visual cues? Like, how do they look?
Right. Are they very, are they pale with blood
bleeding?
Loss? Yeah.
Is there a puddle underneath them that I need to solve?
Or is it more like drips? Right.
See, my problem too is that, it really can affect, role play, right? Because, when you know too much, it kind of changes a little bit, I think. And I think a prime example of this, and one of the main reasons I opted to make a homebrew scratch world, is I had a player in my first campaign operated by a player named Dan. Yeah. Now, Dan is a seasoned veteran. Dan has seen Dungeons and Dragons War, right? He has been through all over the game.
A bunch of the different versions.
So he has all this knowledge of essentially the 150 ways that D&D can kill your player in an instant.
Yeah.
So he built this character that was essentially a walking fortress because he was like, well, I have to get my AC higher. I have to get my AC higher. And I remember kept reminding him being like, hey, your character doesn't necessarily know what an armor class is, right? Like they don't know I'm armor class 20, right? So obviously that's not a problem. But the thing was their fear of like, oh, I see this monster. Okay, I know that's just going to kill me right off the bat. I'm going to stay away. Well, you're missing out on maybe a traumatic or a dramatic moment or something that could be cool or you know, but or some could say the adventure.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of your own knowledge, and to me that was a prime example of that person wasn't necessarily trying to do that on purpose.
No.
They just knew so much about D&D 5e, about Faerun, about Forgotten Realms,
about the monsters that inhabited
so
it.
they knew, you know. I remember I would describe creatures, and after a few descriptors, they already knew what it was. So already, even if they tried to forget, they kind of already knew weaknesses or, oh, it's going to breathe a fire, you know, it has a fire breath. Okay, well, no one's seen that. It's the first time they've seen it. And now everyone's knowing, oh, fire breath, you know.
Right. And even if you don't say anything, even if you don't like express it out loud to anybody, you're still naturally avoiding certain things or doing certain things in reaction to that knowledge. Even if you're not, you know, outwardly knowledgeably doing that, it's subconscious.
Yeah, right. It's just something that I think everyone experiences. There's nobody DM or player alike. It's really about how the table responds and how the table feels about metagaming. And so that's why I chose today's question to address to our community and our couple of nerds on our YouTube and our Discord. Be sure to join, subscribe, like any way you can.
That way you can put your 2 cents
Join
in.
the conversation, ask us a question. Your question could be picked to be on You Heard It From Us, so that we can also have more kind of information. We're always looking for the next big question. But today's poll question was just essentially a really easy one about how do you feel about metagaming at the table? And I picked 3 kind of distinct, which I thought would be kind of funny. Would be it should just straight be punished. At all points, at all moments,
shut that
punish it down. Metagaming is the death of gaming. The next option was that it can't really be helped, but that it should be avoided.
A good middle ground.
Right, a middle ground. And then C, let chaos reign. Everything is allowed, and it doesn't really matter.
Gotcha.
Obviously, what was our results?
Well, the majority was for the middle ground, right? It can't be helped, but it should be avoided. Most players accept that some metagaming is just unavoidable in a game, but to try to keep it to a minimum is the general consensus of everybody. But as always, there are outliers. There were some that voted for punishment and some that voted for anarchy. So it's interesting to see that there's always going to be those people that believe in the complete opposite.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like, obviously most of us, like, you know, most players understand that it can't be helped. Like, it's something that, but I think for, like, the punishing metagaming, I think a lot of that is Dungeon Masters. Dungeon Masters, I feel, are the ones that tend to have a more negative viewpoint on metagaming.
Because it can get very out of hand.
Besides role-playing players, right? So you might have fellow thespian players who, you know, they want you to be immersed, and the only way that they're immersed is if you're immersed.
Yeah,
right?
Otherwise it breaks it for them.
They break, so they tend to get a little more agitated also with that. You know, but the anarchy, let it fly, you know, with a few picking it, I kind of understood it because as someone was kind of talking to me, was just more of like, when you play more of like real world stuff, right? So you're playing more in a more realistic world, but it's a fantasy setting in our world, right? Then it's more of, well, you now get to use your own knowledge. So it's not really metagaming anymore.
Not necessarily.
Well, it's set in our world, so you know how our world works.
Right.
So
some things still apply.
So even knowledge that we're going to assume whatever knowledge you have is also your character's knowledge. So you effectively have removed metagaming by also just allowing metagaming. So if you go and research something, theoretically your character did the same because you also learned it too. I mean, at that point, it's getting to the point where you're basically playing real life.
With a twist of magic at
to
it.
me, it's basically like people who play Guitar Hero too much, and it was like, yo, you could have learned how to play guitar by this point.
In this time, yeah.
So
right?
there's certain points where it's like that. But I get it, it is one of those things where it is a necessary evil that's never going to go away. But again, I think it really comes down to the intent, right? And so for me, it's always about, what were you trying to do? Yeah. Were you trying to help the game along? So, that's where, I think, like, especially with like metagaming pigeons, right?
Yeah.
It's less of, oh, I'm trying to get a player to stop, and more of, I'm trying to alert you of something, right?
Yeah.
So like, the DM's like, talking, and it's, they go, oh, you've entered a room, and in the middle of the room is this, 8x8 empty hole.
Yeah.
And you just happened, as the person, you were talking to somebody, and you didn't hear 8x8 hole in the middle of the room, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, my character walks in. Someone might go, hey, there's a hole in the room, and kind of gives you the heads up. Now, one would say, okay, well, that's metagaming. Theoretically, yes. Sure. But at the same time, it's like, well, if they're being described, and this is what the player is, quote unquote, seeing,
right, and they just missed
their character knows, right?
Yeah.
And there have been times where I have kind of reverse metagamed, right, where it's like a player forgets a certain thing, right? Like, oh, I forgot a name or a person, and another player is trying to press them on it, right? They're like, well, what's the name? How come you don't know the name? And it's like, okay, and they're like, well, someone finally just kind of gives the name to help, and they're like, no, don't help them, that's metagaming. Well, the character knows the name. Right. They just met him yesterday, but it might have been 6 weeks since the sessions have been met.
Slipped their mind.
Right. So there are certain times where I can see that being, an issue, but at the same time, it's like, this helps everyone out in the long run. Yeah. So it's that whole idea of intent to me that really changes how a metagame goes. Now, again, if you're trying to, I think, if you are trying to get ahead of your fellow players or find a way to subvert the DM, then yes, that is true blue metagaming and probably should be called out and, quit.
Gotcha. I get that. I definitely get that perspective as coming from the DM.
Right. I mean, yeah, obviously.
Personally, as a player, from my perspective, I love the challenge of avoiding metagaming. Just personally, I know that's not everybody.
As a preference, DnDWife is an RP player.
I do, yes. I am very much into the RP, the immersion into the sessions. I try to become Luna. During the time that we're playing, obviously. I don't go too crazy. But I do like avoiding metagaming as a way to help my immersion, right? I try to actively separate what DnDWife know versus what my character would know. And unfortunately, at this time, my character knows very little because her memory is gone right now.
It makes it even worse.
I've got amnesia. So, it's really nice, actually, in this campaign because it's avoiding spoilers, a lot of spoilers for me. Even though I'm married to the DM, it really helps keep me out of the loop in a way that maybe might not happen if I had built this whole like big backstory for her. I might have caught
it, might have like some little influences that you might have not even realized you were doing.
Yeah, subconsciously. Like I've said, we don't always metagame intentionally. A lot of the times it's because we're applying the knowledge in our heads and just unintentionally reacting to that knowledge. And so this is how I kind of subverted that subconsciousness by just being like, well, I don't know anything, so I can't, right?
Right.
And with this setup, especially with with us having this bonus room and you having the ability to come in here and kind of close the door and have like a little private time, it helps you be able to build parts of the world and parts of the lore that I'm not privy to keep that sort of metagaming from happening for me.
Yeah,
too much.
Right. And I think that's good because I think it is important to, especially if it's like big reveals that say somebody missed and another player might have picked up on it or learned it. But is it really your opportunity to spill it for them, to spoil it, or try to bring yourself outside of the game? And I also think there's other ways. Another example is like a little final example. I hate to feel like I'm picking on him, but Richard, he's our prime guy for a lot of these good stories. And I remember in campaign 1 with his character Hippolyta, and there was a scene where they were in the tavern, and he used a leveled spell slot against some civilians.
Just a level 1.
Which we know is going to do devastating damage.
Yeah.
And it was that kind of thing where a few players attempted to kind of stop it to begin with, right? And it was like, hey man, that's not, and it was, and I and another kind of couple players just kind of interrupted that and kind of stopped it, because it was where it was like, whoa, you're not there. You're trying to warn someone of consequences, right? No. You let it go, and you let the little pebbles fly, and you see what happens.
Yep.
And so those were times where it's like, people will not necessarily metagame maliciously either, right? You're trying to stop something bad from happening, but sometimes you kind of want to let that bad thing happen, right? And sometimes you have to just remember that when we're playing, and wherever we're having these, is that we're there as our characters, and our characters have certain knowledge, and so do we. But we want to have that perspective, right? And we want to make sure that if we do metagame, which is always inevitable, we're always doing it with the goodest of intentions.
Yeah, the best of intentions.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, thank you. I speaks good.
No worries.
But really is like my final thought really on it is that, like, as with everything D&D and tabletop, it's like metagaming is a tool.
Yep.
Everything about tools, it's about how you use it. A little bit here and there is always good, right? Like using a power tool is always good every now and then.
Yeah.
But if everything you do or everything is just a tool and nothing is of your own work or your own doing, then it's not ever going to feel like you're actually doing anything.
Right. Well, it's like the power tool isn't always the tool that you need for the job.
Yeah. And the thing is, I always say, like, as a DM, I always encourage my players to make the choices that fit their character, not just the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And that it also encouraged them to just like let go and not think of it as a game.
Yeah.
Because yes, it is a game. It's got G at the end of it, right? But at the same time, if you take the gameplay out of it, you're now just really living the life. You're having that role play experience that I think is really the root and the essence of why D&D is so fun and so popular.
That's why we do it. But for me, it's about making the game more immersive, right? If metagaming helps to an extent, that can be great. But if it takes away from the experience, maybe dial it back, right? If it's taking not just you, but maybe the other players or your DM out of the experience at the table, you should be looking out for that and maybe dialing it back if you feel like maybe that's too much.
Right.
Yeah, the best takeaway is probably talk with your DM at the table and the table, right?
I know.
Right? Not just your DM either, but the players at the table, because every game has different rules for metagaming. So it's important to set those expectations early before you just jump in and decide to start doing things without talking it over.
Plus, everyone has an interpretation as to what metagaming truly is. So what one person's metagaming is another person just trying to help out.
Yeah, you never know. It could be very innocent.
But if you have any similar stories, just be sure to also join us on those Discords, join us on the YouTube, let us know. We want to hear your stories as well, because we feel like everything is important and everything matters.
Let us know. We would love your 2 cents. But that's it for today's episode. Whether you love or hate metagaming, the important thing is that your table is having fun.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. How does your group handle metagaming? Join once again our discussions on Discord.
And don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to You Heard It From Us. Your support helps us grow so much.
Thanks for listening. Roll well and metagame responsibly.
Thanks for tuning in to You Heard It From Us.
We hope you enjoyed the adventure and picked up a few tips for your own gaming table. But the journey doesn't end here.
We'd love to hear from you. Join our Couple of Nerds Discord community where you can share your thoughts, ask questions, and suggest topics for future episodes. Whether you're a seasoned player or just starting out, there's a spot for everyone at our table.
To keep up with all our latest adventures and episodes, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep the magic alive and connects us with even more amazing listeners like you.
And remember, you can find us on all major podcast platforms. Just search for You Heard It From Us and hit that subscribe button.
We can't wait to see you on Discord and hear your stories. Together, we can make the world of tabletop gaming even more magical.
Until next time, keep rolling those dice.
And may your adventures be legendary.